Good afternoon. Good afternoon, y'all. It's good to see you. Just a few minutes late. I'm about on schedule. So it's good to see all of you. Some familiar faces as usual. Thanks for being here. This afternoon, this meeting of Game Fishing Parks, we want to make sure everyone's in the right meeting, Game Fishing Parks. That's what we're about right here. We're going to discuss House Bill 869. We're going to hear from Mr. Chairman Roger Lane from down on the coast, who is going to give us some information. I think he also has some other folks who are going to speak to the bill too. If anyone wants to speak, do we have a sign-up list? I'm sorry, Pat. We have a sign-up list right up here on the front. We'd be glad to hear from you. So, nothing else? Chairman Lane.
Here. Can you hear me now? Is it better?
Loud and clear. No, you were good on that side.
Or better over here?
You look good either way.
Okay. I bring to you House Bill 869 for your consideration. It's a natural resources bill that mostly affects coastal Georgia, has some provisions that apply to saltwater fishing at some of the lakes that we'll talk about after a while. With me to kind of present an overview of what's in the bill by presentation will be Spud Woodward, who's director. Y'all all know Spud, director of Coastal Resources Division of Department of Natural Resources. And he's got a PowerPoint presentation just kind of give an overview of what all is contained in this bill. And then we will be glad to go through it section by section if you want to. If you have questions about a particular section, we can go to that. But let's let him present his, if it's okay with the chair, present his PowerPoint on what's in the bill and the purposes of it, and then we'll take it up from there.
Sounds very appropriate, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Spud. We'd love to hear from you and hear what you got to tell us.
Thank you, Chairman. What I'd like to do is just give you a little background on what led to the creation of House Bill 869. Right now, the management of our saltwater fisheries is divided between the Georgia General Assembly through statute, and you can see here over on the far left side some of the things that are conducted through statute: licensing, general methods of fishing, saltwater, freshwater demarcation, also very specific management measures for a list of fish species that you see there. Over on the Board of Natural Resources, it's been delegated authority by the General Assembly for a subset of management actions related to saltwater fishing, and you see those listed there, as well as it is given considerable authority to manage freshwater fishing and hunting. The Commissioner of the Department of Natural Resources is given further limited authority specifically to open and close state waters for the harvest of food and bait shrimp, for blue crabs and whelks, and that authority was given because of the dynamic nature of those fishing activities and the fact that we need to open and close waters very quickly in response to environmental conditions and market conditions. What this has created is a situation where for some species, and I'm going to use red drum, which is our state saltwater fish, as an example, we actually have partial management authority in statute and partial management authority in board rule. And what this does, it means in the case of managing this species that only the General Assembly can change the length, can designate it as a game fish, which under Georgia law means that that's a species that can only be taken with hook and line and cannot be sold commercially, whereas the DNR board, through the authority granted to it by the General Assembly, can change the possession limit, change the fishing seasons, prohibit sale, something like that. So it creates this fragmented approach to managing fish. Also bringing a challenge to this is the fact that because we're on the coast and fish don't adhere to political boundaries, they move wherever they need to complete their life history. Some species will manage to travel far distances. For instance, the shad that our fishermen are catching out of the Altamaha River right now may have his range as far north as Canada during their life history. But they come back to coastal Georgia and run up our rivers. So it's very important that we manage collaboratively with other states. And you can see that we participate in the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. In fact, Chairman Burns is the legislative commissioner for the state of Georgia. This commission was formed in 1942 specifically for the purpose of ensuring that states manage shared fish populations effectively and responsibly. All the Atlantic Coast states participate, as well as the Potomac River Fisheries Commission and the federal government through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Marine Fisheries Service. We have 3 members that comprise 1 vote. We vote as a caucus on that commission. Georgia's territorial waters only extend out to 3 miles. So beyond 3 miles, that is the exclusive province of the federal government through the National Marine Fisheries Service, or NOAA Fisheries. We participate in management of federal waters as members of the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council. Oftentimes, the commission and the council are making decisions that require the state to be able to make a very timely decision to manage fish in cooperation with these groups. And so that is flexibility that we need when we deem it prudent to take compatible actions with the federal government and with the commission. So we have a current governance structure through Title 27, the Game and Fish Code, that's archaic in a lot of ways because it's been built over decades and decades of very specific statutory action to deal with a very specific fishery management issue. It's sort of layered and layered and layered. And then also some of its content, just because of the fact that it dates back decades, is no longer relevant. So that leads to a situation where the Department of Natural Resources doesn't have the ability that it needs to respond to new science-based information. And this is biology, it's human dimensions work, studying the patterns of behavior of fishermen, it's economic sciences, it's more than just biological sciences, to react to that new information and to changing conditions in a timely manner. Also, I think very important for you is that you are oftentimes asked to make routine fishery management decisions that would be best made perhaps by the DNR board or the DNR commissioner. Your schedule is very busy, it gets tied up with a lot of things, and in making routine management decisions is something that you have already given the department authority to do, and this bill, as I go through it, you'll see really just asked to expand the authority that you've already vested in the department. Another thing that's very important is because of the Administrative Procedures Act and also department policy, whenever the Board of Natural Resources or the commissioner makes a management decision, there is mandated public involvement. We do not make these decisions absent of public involvement. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So what we've done is taken a hard look at Title 27, looking at the statutory basis for how the department manages saltwater fish. We did this over the last couple of years, a very deliberative, slow process of going page by page in Title 27 and looking at all the interrelationships between various code sections. We have a standing advisory body that's comprised of members that represent all facets of saltwater fishing, commercial fishing, recreational fishing, marine-related businesses, ecotourism. We met with this group several times during the past year to vet our proposed changes through them. And then once we had a final product, it was vetted through the DNR commissioner, the board, and ultimately the governor from August through December. And then ultimately we produced a draft bill that we brought to the General Assembly for consideration, and Representative Lane very graciously took this on. And we had a couple of meetings on the coast back in January during your budget recess to have some input from the regulated community. And that gave us some insight to some of the concerns and feelings. So what we have produced that ultimately became House Bill 869 will do the following things. It will create legislative action to add the fish species you see in bold here to this already existing list of fish that the board has management authority over. And you can see red drum is bolded because what we would be doing in this bill is expanding the authority over red drum to cover all the management aspects, size, possession, seasons, so forth and so on. So you can see there's already 17 species or species groups of saltwater fish that are under the authority of the board. We're simply asking to put these additional species under that same authority, and the parameters are set in the bill. I believe it's in Section 5. One of the things we are going to do that I believe will be favorably received by the fishing community is right now a fish species called whiting, a very popular saltwater panfish, is being regulated. But with the decline in shrimping and other changes in the coastal environment, we don't believe that's a species that really needs management anymore. So we propose that it actually be dropped from the list of managed species. So it would not have currently doesn't have a creel limit, so it would continue to not have a creel limit, also would not have a minimum size limit. Another aspect of this bill would be to broaden the Commissioner of Natural Resources authority to take action in support of conservation. And specifically, what the Commissioner would be empowered to do is to, for a period not to exceed 6 months, prohibit the harvest of managed fish species. And this will give us the flexibility to react to extraordinary environmental events. Like you see here, this is actually frozen salt water on the edge of the marsh. And you know it's cold when it freezes salt water. We had these kind of fish-killing freezes the last couple of winters in 2010 and 2011. Also, if a longer closure were deemed necessary for conservation benefits, then the Board of Natural Resources would be required to take that action through a full deliberative process with all the public input required by the Administrative Procedures Act and by department policy. So this gives us, the department greater flexibility to react to environmental conditions, also to respond to interstate and federal fishery management actions if we deem it in the best interest of the state. This does not mean that we would automatically track federal fishery management actions. It just means that if we think it's in the best interest of the state, after public input, that's what we would do through this mechanism. All the decisions that are going to be made by the Commissioner are going to be in consultation with the regulated community. We have advisory panels like the Marine Fishery Advisory Council. We also have a Shrimp Advisory Panel, a Blue Crab Advisory Panel, and we're going to create a Finfish Advisory Panel, and those groups will be consulted before we take any action. Some other things that are included in this bill would be to move authority to the board to determine the lawful fishing methods and fishing gear for use in saltwater, to set commercial fishing regulations for the list you see there: American eel, catfish in saltwater, horseshoe crab, jellyfish, and shad. And I want to specifically mention jellyfish because the bill adds that to the department's list of regulated species. Over the last decade, a commercial fishery for cannonball jellyfish has developed on the coast and has proven to be fairly lucrative and important to some of our shrimp fishermen, particularly during this time of the year when they can't catch anything else. And so we believe that it's a bona fide fishery, needs to be recognized as such and regulated as such. Also, the board would be able to manage recreational shrimp fishing and commercial bait shrimping. Would be able to determine which non-game fish can be taken from Georgia waters with a cast net. And this, you may wonder why this, but right now, if you are on the saltwater side of the demarcation line, you can catch mullet with a cast net. If you're on the freshwater side of the demarcation line, you can't. And so it really doesn't make a lot of sense to have these artificial lines separating harvest methods. And mullet fishing can be very productive in freshwater. So this will give the board the flexibility to set the regulations based on the conditions and not on an artificial delineation point. Also, and this is freshwater related, but felt it made good sense to bundle this into our bill, will be to allow the board to approve the use of live fish for bait in certain trout waters, and also to allow the use of more than one pole and line when fishing for trout and impoundments. We do have some impoundments that have trout in them, but right now, because they're classified as trout waters, you're bound by trout fishing regulations. So this will actually increase opportunities for freshwater fishermen. Also, in our shellfish fishery, a lot of the shellfish that we produce in coastal Georgia, specifically oysters and clams, they enter into interstate commerce. And, as you're all well aware, contaminated seafood can be very dangerous to public health. So there is an oversight body at the federal level called the National Shellfish Sanitation Program that works with shellfish producing states to ensure that the product coming out of those states is safe and can enter interstate commerce. And one of the model ordinances of this program would be to require marine toilets on commercial shellfish harvesting vessels. And at the risk of being indelicate in this setting, right now a commercial shellfish harvester can have a bucket on his boat and he can use that bucket for multiple purposes. And that's not a very desirable thing. So we believe this would be good. It's supported by the Shellfish Association in Georgia. And in order to expedite this, if this bill were to be successful, we will actually be using some federal funds to purchase the first marine toilets for our commercial harvesters so they don't have to spend that money. Also, the commercial shellfish fishermen have come to us and asked about changing the minimum size for commercially harvested oysters from 3 inches to 2 inches. There is a burgeoning market for smaller oysters, and our fishermen would like to have an opportunity to capitalize on that market, and so this would require a law change to set that size limit from 3 inches to 2 inches. Another thing that's very important is, we need to be able to collect good data to make good management decisions. So right now in Georgia we have a universal fishing license. If you fish in saltwater, you fish in freshwater, you have the same license. We do not have a separate saltwater fishing license. But we find ourselves in need of being able to identify who our saltwater fishermen are so that we can keep track of their fishing effort, their catch. Also, in order for our fishermen who fish outside of state waters to be exempt from the National Saltwater Angler Registry. So what we have proposed is to do something similar to the Migratory Bird Harvest Information Program. What we would do is create this Saltwater Information Program permit. It would not cost them anything. They would be able to get it from the licensed vendors. Basically, if you've got a lifetime license, if you've got a one-day license, you get this no-cost Saltwater Information Program endorsement, and that way it tags you as a saltwater fisherman and allows us to keep track of you and to provide that information back to the National Marine Fisheries Service, and that means that anybody that has that license in Georgia is exempt from that National Saltwater Angler Registry, which is a $15 permit that they don't have to buy. And it'll also help the department do a much better job of keeping track of our saltwater fishermen and managing their activities. We also have some archaic language in Title 27 that was established in the 70s specifically to manage shrimp and blue crab fisheries. It's very prescriptive language that is actually included in the sound principles we use to make all our management decisions, and we believe that language can be struck from the code, and you'll see in multiple references in the bill to based on current sound principles of wildlife research and management. That is the underlying standard that we use for all of our management activities, whether it be freshwater fishing, hunting, or saltwater fishing. Also sturgeon. There are references to sturgeon fishing and sturgeon nets in the code. Both short-nosed and Atlantic sturgeon are now listed under the Endangered Species Act. We don't believe there's going to be any fishing for them in the foreseeable future. However, if through this bill, if we did reestablish fishable populations, the board would be able to set the fishing methods, and we could go back to having a sturgeon fishery. And last but not least, we need to periodically amend statute in order to bring our regulations consistent with code. So we've included that as an action in this bill. So that is a very quick run-through of the high points of a very lengthy and complex bill. You will see in the bill there's a lot of repeal sections where we are streamlining things, getting rid of redundant language. But at the end of the day, I think the take-home message for the committee is that this bill, with the exception of the actions taken by the legislature on oysters and the marine toilets and things like this, will not in and of itself change any saltwater fishing regulations. And it is our plan, if this bill is successful, we will go through the full board rulemaking process, have public hearings, take all this back out to the board to seamlessly transfer the existing regulations over to the Board of Natural Resources. And it has an effective date, you'll see, of January 1, 2013. And what that would do is give the department the remainder of 2012 to do the necessary board rulemaking, so we would have that seamless transfer of authority between statute and board regulation. So thank you. That was a lot, but thank you for your patience, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Yeah,
you also, I believe, have a summary document in your folder that goes section by section and relates the bill to the actions that I have just discussed.
Thank you, Spud. Mr. Chairman, at this point in time, I guess we could open it up for some questions from the committee. Would that be appropriate?
That'd be
okay with you?
You have some speakers. I don't know if some people signed up.
We want to hear from them. I want to ask a few questions. We won't get bogged down here with Spud, but if there's any clarification before we hear from the other speakers while we have Spud up there, does anyone have a question? All right, push it up.
Hey.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Representative Spencer, go ahead.
Can you tell me how much of this legislation has been driven by the Magnuson-Stevenson Act?
The only thing that I could say would be directly related to the Magnuson-Stevens Act would be the request to broaden the commissioner's authority to respond to federal fisheries changes. Other than that, nothing else.
And would that be the reason why you want to give the additional authorization for the commissioner in Section 18 to close down certain fisheries, depending on the environmental issues that may be out there? Is that what's driving to give him that authority, or partly related to that?
That's part of it. But I think of equal importance is the ability to react to conditions within the state's jurisdiction, like these winter situations. Also, in interstate fishery management is just as important to us as federal fishery management. And again, I think I'll reiterate that, this will give the commissioner the discretion to do it. Will not mandate. In the state of South Carolina, their statutes mandate that state law will follow federal fishing regulations. I don't agree with that. I don't think you would agree with that. But I do believe we need the flexibility with accountability.
I got one more question. Now, the commissioner already has authority to shut down certain fisheries based on health and emergency. Can you tell me what if there is an Administrative Procedure Act, does the commissioner have to come before the board, or does he come before a committee in the legislature to say, this is why we closed down the fishery for this reason, based on human health issues that might be there? So in a case, if we broaden his authority in Section 18, how would the Administrative Procedures Act show some accountability that the commissioner would have to answer to the board or answer to the state legislature?
Well, the Administrative Procedures Act does not specifically require him to report back to the board, because these are decisions that are usually made in a fairly quick turnaround, 24 to 48 hours on opening and closing shrimp season, for example. After a deliberate process of collecting the data, we go to the commissioner. I think from a practical standpoint, the commissioner is going to always be very sensitive of his responsibility to be answerable back to the legislature and to the board and to the governor for anything he's doing.
I guess my concern is as you know, I've got a vocal constituency, and you heard from at the at the public comments meeting. The concern, and I think it's a valid concern, is if we give the commissioner this kind of authority and there's no type of accountability. Let's say he had to make a decision based on the best available data that you had, and what if the data was wrong, and he had to make a call and it had an economic impact negatively? Is he going to be able to be accountable for those actions based on the best science that he had available? I mean, how do we work through that process currently, if that were to happen?
Well, I think that he's obviously answerable to the Board of Natural Resources, for anything that he does, regardless of whether it's operational or policy or whatever. I think that in the matter of being answerable back to the legislature, it really comes down to a practical matter that he's going to have to weigh, the economic consequences of a decision, against the conservation benefits, and just like we do in any of our decisions. And I think the reason that this is very prescriptive and short-term, permission, basically, is to keep this from being something that's any broader. I mean, 6 months would be the most he could do in a year. Anything beyond that is going to require the board, and then when the board gets involved in it, then the Administrative Procedures Act does come into play. And one of the things that Chairman Lane and I were discussing is that through the Administrative Procedures Act in its current version, 2/3 of this committee and 2/3 of the Senate Natural Resources Committee could oppose a proposed rule of the Department of Natural Resources, and it would be stayed. Stop.
Is there anything in the Administrative Procedures Act that if a advisory council or a committee that was appointed by the DNR, the board, if they objected to, let's say the commissioner said we're going to shut down Red Drum for so long based on the data that we have, and it turned out to be, oops, we made a mistake, is there anything that currently exists that would hold him accountable to either the board or the legislature if he made that decision that had a negative economic impact?
Not as I understand it's articulated in the Administrative Procedures Act. No.
Okay.
It holds that board, the appointed board, accountable for its actions through its language.
And I'm not trying to be, I am being devil's advocate here because I have a vocal
understand.
constituency that is concerned about Section 18, and I wanted to flesh through this a little bit to make
Right.
them feel better
Right.
what would be there and what would not be
Well,
there.
I think I can give you an example of what the unintended consequences may be of the state not having the flexibility. We'll use black sea bass, for example. Right now there's a 400,000 pound catch quota for the South Atlantic for black sea bass. All the states other than Georgia and the South Atlantic have the mechanism to close their state waters to black sea bass harvest when federal waters close. When you have a set quota like that, if you catch more than that quota under the federal management system, then that quota gets reduced by that overage the next year. And so in the case of Georgia, say for instance that we allowed black sea bass fishing in our waters, which we currently are doing, and we caught, let's just say theoretically, 10,000 pounds of black sea bass, then that 10,000 pounds got deducted from the next year's quota, and so it could have an adverse effect on our fishermen in that there's less quota for them to catch the next year. So that's the kind of thing you really got to balance out. The commissioner's got to balance the cost and the benefits, both short-term and long-term. So that's one of the things I think we try to explain to some of our fishermen that are not real happy about federal fishery management right now is that, yes, it needs some improvement. We all need to make it better, but, we don't tie in the hands of the state agency to prevent it from making decisions is not the way to solve federal fishery management problems.
And that's from the Magnuson-Stevenson
Right.
Act. Okay.
Right.
Anybody else? Spud, when it actually does go to the board and you have a board rule that is passed out by the board, now, and that's when the Administrative Procedures Act comes in.
Actually, but when it's proposed, it
Proposed.
kicks in. In other words, when we propose a rule, we notify Legislative Council, and it is Legislative Council's responsibility to notify the chairs of the committees under which that action would fall. Say, for instance, if it was a hunting, fishing, saltwater, freshwater, then you would be notified and Senator Tolson should be notified. And then it is your option at that point to decide whether you want to notify your full committee to be aware of it. But that's where the if two-thirds of the sitting members of those committees decide that they're opposed to the proposed rule, it's stopped before it ever even goes through the rulemaking process.
Okay.
And then if something were to happen and you didn't oppose it and then ultimately that rule came to pass and didn't like the rule, then the legislature can reverse that rule the following legislative session. So we believe a healthy checks and balances system in there legally, as well as there's the practical considerations of agency heads not doing things contrary to the General Assembly.
Gotcha. Thanks. No other questions right now. You're going to be around for a few minutes, aren't you?
Oh, well, I'm not
Answer
going
more
anywhere.
questions. I kind of figured you might be.
I'm not going anywhere.
We didn't want Dan to have to answer any questions. We wanted
No,
you to do it
no.
at this point. We'll call up some folks now if you're ready for some comments. Mr. Brooks Sheehan from the Coastal Council, and he's obviously very knowledgeable on this subject, and we look forward to hearing some of his words of wisdom. It's good to have you. Good to see you, sir. Mr. Brooks, always a pleasure. Next will be Mr. Thomas Jones.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to speak to you today and in regards to House Bill 869. My name is Brooks Shane, and I live in House District number 52, and I was born and raised in Atlanta. I've had the opportunity to be very involved with DNR over the past 25 years. My 20 years of attending Weekend for Wildlife has given me great contact with many DNR employees, and I have seen their commitment to our coastal treasures that has been unwavering. Having worked with all the commissioners from Joe Tanner to now Mark Williams, coastal directors Dwayne Harris, Susan Shipman, and Spud Woodward, I can personally attest that we have been truly blessed with men and women of outstanding integrity and enthusiasm to protect and enhance our wildlife and fisheries for the people of Georgia. I belong to the Coastal Conservation Association of Georgia, known as CCA. And we represent 1,800 Georgia saltwater fishermen. Our organization is an advocacy group dedicated to marine conservation and protection of habitat. We have over 96,000 members along coastal waters from Virginia to Texas. I am currently the Government Relations Chairman for CCA Georgia, and our board members have endorsed and approved to support House Bill 869. A part of this declaration from CCA is as follows. The Georgia DNR's management of its freshwater fisheries and game hunting has been observed and evaluated, and the members of CCA Georgia believe the DNR has demonstrated responsibility and respect of the resources and Georgia citizens and has appropriately managed these resources. Neighboring states have similar arrangements for marine fishery management. For example, Florida has the governor-appointed Fish and Wildlife Commission, which has rulemaking authority. Having observed marine fishery management in Florida for a number of years, CCA Georgia believes that similar procedures as outlined in this legislation would benefit Georgia's marine fishery and its sportsmen and women. I personally find DNR to be professionally competent, responsive to public input, and most importantly, genuinely concerned for the welfare of our natural resources. So I come to you today with great confidence that your decision to give them this responsibility is appropriate. That is, we start at the top with the governor, the DNR board, the commissioner, and the Coastal Resource Division. Have they not shown that they can manage our resources for the best interest of Georgians? I thank you all for your service and for this opportunity to meet with you today, and I request that you give every consideration to support House Bill 869 to provide DNR with the authority it needs to best serve the people of Georgia, both present and future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks, and we appreciate your efforts, personal efforts, and from the group to do just what you just told us.
Well, thank you.
And y'all done an
proud to
outstanding
be
job.
associated with them.
You should be. Is there a question for Mr. Brooks? Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank
Appreciate you being here. Mr. Jones. And then Mr. Brooks Binder after Mr. Jones.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My name is Tom Jones. I was born and raised in Atlanta. My wife and I have a house in St. Simons, and I'm here as a saltwater sports fisherman in support of the bill. I'm on the board of the Coastal Conservation with Brooks Shane. I'm also on the board of the Georgia Wildlife Federation that Jerry McCullum's going to speak more eloquently about shortly. And I'm on the board of the Isaac Walton League, Greater Atlanta Chapter, all sporting and conservation groups. And I also chair the Turning Poachers Program for the state of Georgia. I'm the guy that writes the $100 checks that leads to information to the rest of a wildlife violator. But we are in support of this House bill. We think that the Coastal Resources Divisions, the DNR, will do a great job in managing our saltwater fisheries management. We believe in the science of that, and I also know that they believe in the science of that, so we're definitely in support of that. We also support the Saltwater Information Program. It'll give the DNR more information about our saltwater anglers to know what kind of needs that the anglers are wanting, what kind of fishing they're trying to do, and it'll just be a great resource for the state to have, which is part of that bill. We also support the saltwater fishing, crab, shrimping, and oyster populations. We want to make sure they're healthy for our present and future generations can have saltwater fishing and a safe, abundant, and a good seafood to eat. I will not take up any more of your time. I'll be happy to answer questions, but I'm a big believer in the bill, and I think our state does a great job of managing our saltwater.
You do so many things and involved in so much. I'm sure there's a question from Ms. Jones. Question from the committee. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate your service to our state and to conservation.
Good
Mr.
afternoon.
Brooks Binder, good to have you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to come and speak. I'm Brooks Binder, the other Brooks, and happen to be a fisherman as well, and I'm also associated with the Coastal Conservation Association. I live here in Atlanta in District 54, but I grew up down in Savannah, Georgia, and have been fishing those waters all my life. I keep a boat down there. I've got 4 sons. Between May and November, we take every opportunity we can to take advantage of that resource. And before me, going back 6 generations of my family have been fishing those waters. To me, our coastal fisheries are the greatest state treasure that we have. And I think we have to do everything we can to protect those resources the best way that we can. In my day job, I'm a corporate lawyer. I counsel my clients and organizations on a lot of governance matters, organizational risks. Do you have the right processes in place to make well-informed decisions in an efficient manner? I won't go through in detail what Spud has told you about in terms of the fragmentation of the current framework. But to me, that sort of fragmentation presents some risks. And with this great state treasure that we have, that's a risk that we can't really afford. I'm strongly in favor of House Bill 869. I think Spud did a wonderful job explaining all the different saltwater species that they already regulate, they have responsibility for. They've done a wonderful job doing that. And, I think that it would make a lot of sense to bring this under a unified method, and there's a lot of checks and balances that are in place, so I think we can be very satisfied that the DNR will do the very best job and protect this great state treasure that we have. One thing I meant to pass out at the beginning of my talk, I brought a book that has a few photos in it. I think visual aids are often helpful. So if I could, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to just sort of pass it around to the committee.
Absolutely.
I marked several pages that have photos of fish, and some of these pictures go back 50 and 60 years, and you'll see the vastness of this resource and the beauty of the resource that we have. So again, I would urge you to please vote favorably on House Bill 869, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks Binder. We may have a question. You certainly have a long history, personally and in your family, with enjoying that wonderful resource coming from Savannah. Good to have you.
Thank you for the time.
Any questions for Mr. Binder from the committee? Thank you. Appreciate your words and your involvement with CCA. And I forgot Mr. Young, and then Mr. McCullum's next. Mr. Jeff Young, good to have you. Look forward to hearing your words.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Appreciate all of you being here that have come up to let us hear your words of wisdom. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name's Jeff Young. I'm a resident of the 111th District. I'm an avid fisherman and a hunter. I travel to Georgia's coast about 8 to 10 times a year as the opportunity allows. And this past year I enjoyed my first gator hunt out of Darien. It was a great time, and I appreciate y'all giving us the opportunity to experience that.
I guess you got one.
Yes, sir, I did.
All right.
It wasn't huge, but he was about an 8-footer, and took about 20 minutes and my gator season was over. But it was the most exciting hunt of my life, I can tell you that. Back to the bill. This bill does call for the legislature to change its interaction with the saltwater fisheries, but the body would still have the same oversight and responsibility that it has over freshwater fish and game animals. It'll make your oversight more uniform with regard to all game and fisheries, from the way I interpret it anyway. With the General Assembly only meeting for about 40 days each year, it can be difficult for this body to make a science-based management decision in a timely and effective manner. That problem, Spud's already spoken on it, but it could put the state of Georgia in a bad position when they need to make take quick action, whether it be from federal government problems or environmental emergencies. Obviously, a decision not to comply with interstate or federal fishery management measures should be a conscious decision. You know, Spud talked about South Carolina, the law not allowing them to disagree with the feds. They have to walk in lockstep, and you know, it's not always the right answer. So this bill does give us flexibility to do what's best for the state of Georgia. I've watched DNR closely for about 15 years. I've been active. I've been in this conference room several times on different issues, and I've watched DNR interacting with the public at their public input meetings, and I've noted that they do pay attention. The biologists, technicians, and the law enforcement officers that attend those public input meetings are very attentive to that public input, and I've witnessed them make changes based on that public input. So I feel like we can trust them to take the public's comments into account relative to management. But I'd also like to point out that the legislature is not giving up control over the resource or the department, but only placing the trust in the board and the commissioner. And that board's populated by individuals who could be replaced by the governor if public outcry was there. So, and the legislature always has the opportunity to go back and change things, make amendments as required. So I'd appreciate you voting favorably on House Bill 869.
Do we have a question for Jeff?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Jeff. Brooks, I was looking at these great pictures in this book. This is pretty interesting, and I guess we all have a realization that one time we thought the resources in the ocean were endless and never could catch them all. But I guess we've learned that that's not exactly the case, is it? So we appreciate it, and thanks. Mr. Jerry McCullum with the Georgia Wildlife Federation. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You got the spotlight.
We appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak to this bill. I have 28 board seats. There's 4 of them vacant right now, but the other 23 at home are pretty much like Tom Jones. They are vested in conservation in our state. The Georgia Wildlife Federation also supports House Bill 869, and I will save most of my words for sometime when we have a bill that's not so well organized and well vetted. But a couple of points I would like to make, and that is that the DNR Coastal Resources Division has vetted this proposal in extreme fashion, in my opinion. They've been in public meetings with it. They've been before interest groups. They've had it before my board. They've had it before organized events where my members gather. And so we think that it has an extensive public review already. There is also a great satisfaction, I believe, in the public that the Coastal Resources Division of the DNR is a management organization of the highest caliber. They've got fine research people, they've got fine technicians, and that they do manage our resources in an extremely thoughtful way. If there is a chink in that process, it is the chink that some days you can't do a timely, effective management decision because it requires legislative authority to make it. So we support the process of the General Assembly giving that authority to the DNR and to the Commissioner of DNR. We don't always agree on everything either. And when we do, we voice our opinions about it, and we have, there's a process there in place now. The rulemaking process works. In surveys among our 44,000 members of the Georgia Wildlife Federation indicated very strong support for this concept, and so I would propose to you that you're not going to hear from a lot of folks. We always know that we can't agree on everything, but on this bill there is a wide agreement that this process will not injure the process overall. The management will be improved and the resource will be more effectively managed in the long run. So we would hope that you would unburden the General Assembly of such work and then hold the DNR responsible for it, as you do for freshwater fisheries and for other natural resources issues. And we would strongly recommend to you to move this bill on out of this committee and to the full House and let everybody else have a say at it. Thank you, sir.
Questions for Mr. Jerry?
Happy to answer anything. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your insight. I mean, you have great insight into this resource, and we appreciate your words. Mr. Reggie Dickey, Hunting and Fishing Federation of Georgia, I think, right? It's the state you work with. Good to have you, Reggie.
I'm Reggie Dickey, president of Georgia Hunting and Fishing Federation, and I've studied this bill. We've studied it. Our directors have. We do not have a problem with it. I sent out an email when this bill came up in this committee hearing and sent the bill along with the email and told everyone, and this went statewide. Study this bill, look at it. If you have any objections or anything you want to speak up on, let me know. I have not heard a word. So far as I'm concerned, our members are okay with it. I was at the meeting that Representative Spencer was at, and I heard the same things that he heard. What I took away from that meeting was a lot of people didn't understand what they were reading. Everyone's afraid of change, and no one wants to turn over more power to bureaucrats. And that's where they were looking at it, plain and simple. So I think once this bill is explained to them, how it simplifies the code, how it's going to help them, they will be more satisfied with it. And having said that, I have the utmost confidence in the commissioner we have now and the staff that he has working for him. I think they've done a great job, and I think they will continue to do good. However, down the road, we don't know who's going to replace any of us in this room today. And I think you could sell this much easier to the constituents and other people if you put a sunset clause on it. That's just my speaking. So, but we approve it, and I appreciate the chance to talk to you.
Thank you, Mr. Dickey. Any questions for Mr. Reggie Dickey? Representative Spencer.
Yes, we were there, and it was quite a meeting, I must say. Would you not agree that I think most of the concern at the Brunswick meeting was, I felt what I heard from constituents and others was to have a check to the commissioner's new broadened authority to the legislature. That's what I kept hearing. If he's going to be given this authority, and like you said, you don't know who you're going to get down the road. I like Mark Williams. He hunts, he fishes, he knows that, and we got a good one. But who is to say that we could not, if we got somebody else down the road that would not see it that way? And what I heard from that meeting was we need to build in some type of accountability language in Section 18, and that's what I would ask this committee to consider. And also I agree with your sunset clause, or potential or amendment for one.
I don't know if I got your question out of all of that.
I would just, I don't know if you heard that from the meeting,
Yeah,
but that's
yeah.
what I heard from constituents. That was the constant,
Yeah.
concern.
And as I said in that meeting, and I'll say here again today, I do not ever see the legislators relinquishing their power over DNR. If you did, I would be standing here, or whoever was going to be representing us at that time, with a different point of view than what we have now. I think we have excellent checks and balances in place, and I just think the sunset clause would make those people who are a little uneasy about it a little more comfortable.
Thank you. Anybody else?
As long as y'all don't stop me from using bait fishing, I'm okay.
I thought you were a hunter, not a fisherman, but you're both. Thank you, Reggie. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate what your group, you personally and your association does for our resource in the outdoors. Thank you. Does anybody else that maybe did not sign up like to have an opportunity to speak? Mr. Donahue, Representative.
Mr. Spud, I would like to ask a question. The only thing I'm an expert on oysters is I love to eat them.
Yep.
But from 3 inches to 2 inches, what basically is that for?
There is a new market in the restaurants for a smaller, what they call a cup oyster, and our commercial harvesters are looking at starting to grow more oysters in baskets and other types of processes, whether instead of just depending on wild oysters, because in Georgia, unlike the panhandle of Florida and places, our oysters grow intertidally and they cluster together, and they're looking at new techniques, and so they can grow that oyster quick, get it into the market, and there's actually people that like that smaller more that oyster, and so we see no reason. They're harvesting from prescribed areas that they lease from the state, so this would not affect areas outside of the place that they're specifically harvesting.
Thank you.
Mr. Director, speak to the issue, if you will, about your viewpoint as far as a possible sunset clause, if it were offered, what effect it would have.
Well, actually, I was just talking to Chairman Lane about that. I think that if this committee deemed that to be a prudent action, perhaps it could be restricted to the section that empowers the commissioner, maybe not the entire bill. I don't know whether that's possible or not. I guess that's a question for Legislative Council. That specific section broadening the commissioner's authority would be sunsetted. I believe the rest of the bill is consistent with the way the department's operated, and I would like to not see the entire bill sunsetted, but I don't want to speak for the bill sponsor, but perhaps that particular section. But again, that would be your call.
One of the things I would advocate an amendment for Section 18 is to, if the commissioner uses his authority, that he or she, whoever that may be in the future, have to come to the legislature in the following session and explain or testify as to why a fishery was shut down, because this could have major economic impact if all available data was not given to the commissioner and he or she made that decision. If fisheries were negatively impacted, I think the legislature should know that, and that's what I would like to see in Section 18, an amendment to say that. As far as the sunset clause, I would like to see a sunset provision for all the new regulation and authority that you're giving as far as the management of the saltwater fisheries here. I know you probably don't agree with that, but I would like that could always come up during the legislative session, and we could review that. I think the concern out there, and we don't have anybody from Camden or Brunswick, as far as I know, that did not agree with all of the regulation that this bill does bring to come. It's a 5-hour drive away. They don't have the time to come up here, and they're out trying to make a living. But I'm speaking for them today, and I would like to see at least those two provisions put in the bill if we can do that. I think that would make some of them feel better about this bill.
I'll let you address that.
Mr. Chairman?
If I could
in
kind of
response-
speak.
Yes, sir.
I also speak for folks from the coast. And to amend paragraph 18 to make the commissioner come to the legislature every year to explain the rules that he had put into effect, I think is pretty cumbersome. I think if we did something, we ought to do something a little more reporting, like to the chairman of the committees or something like that, rather than have to come and justify every decision that he makes. I think the key to this bill is to make it a uniform system. And what we're doing now with the saltwater fisheries that are controlled by the DNR has worked. And we're just adding to that. And so we always maintain control over them. If they do something that we hear from our constituents we don't like, we can certainly come in and take all this power away from them. And I don't look at it as power necessarily. I look at it as meeting their obligations to protect the fisheries and so that we have them for future generations. And I think this bill makes it more likely that good science will be applied, that we won't have delays in implementing those decisions, and that they can make those decisions with some oversight from the legislature. So I would like to have it passed out like it is, of course. That's how we drafted it, and I think it's a good bill like it is. I've not heard a lot from coastal folks about pro or con, but I've heard a lot of folks about DNR over the years, over 8 years being there, as all of us have. If you're out there and someone's been offended by DNR, they come to their representative and tell us what they think about it. And so that process, and that influences, I know it influences me. I always go and look at what the procedure is and what the process was that was used with that person to see if it needs to be changed, if it's something that is being abused, that we need to do something. And we have taken some actions to correct some things like that. The legislature has while I've been here. So I think our system works like it is. I think to give this additional to them, that we'll still have the same safeguards, and would encourage the committee to join with us in passing this bill out and giving this authority to the DNR and to the commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we've, Representative Spencer, I think we've talked a little bit about the Georgia Administrative Procedures Act, and it does give a second bite of the apple when something comes up by those actions from the proposed rule, and then if in fact the board does pass it out as a board rule, we have the opportunity to take a look at it. But certainly we'd be, if you would like to craft an amendment to the bill, we certainly can the committee can consider that. If that's not the case, I think I'm going to call for a vote on the bill as it is.
Well, could we then at least entertain the idea of a sunset clause, to craft an amendment to do a sunset clause?
Mr. Chairman?
I'm not strongly in favor of sunset clause. I certainly, something we can look at. I haven't really looked at that issue and how it does affect all of this if we put a sunset in it. The only sunset I would even think about would be something with the commissioner's power that we give to him that's not subject to the Administrative Practices Act. It's subject to our, we can change anything he does if we don't like it. But I just think I've been here 8 years, and I think it's really good to get away from those sunset clauses as much as we can, so that we don't have to have someone keeping up with it in the future try to redo it. If there's something wrong with it, we can come in and change it without a sunset clause. I mean, we don't need that necessarily to make a change. Sunset clause makes us take some action that we may miss, and if we did, it would just, because nobody paid any attention to it, then it would just die. The act would die there. So I'm a little hesitant to encourage sunset clause.
Just a minute, Mr. Chairman. Chairman McCall.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion whenever we get time.
Yes, sir. And I know you're on a time here. Just, I guess one other comment. Representative Spencer, I guess we can put the ultimate sunset on this. If we put a 5-year or a 3-year sunset on it, but if we don't like the way it's working, we'll sunset it next year, or would it go after 13 when it goes into effect? So we could certainly do that by action of this committee, and then by action of the General Assembly would be from my positions how I see that. but certainly, it's certainly your right if you want to if you'd like to write an amendment, we can consider that. The committee can, but if not, we're going to take a vote on it as it stands.
Would you vote to craft an amendment?
And right here, if you're talking about a sunset clause, that would be difficult. It's a little more complex than just a simple amendment. I think is that what you're talking about? You have to let me know exactly what you want in there. From there, yes. There have been a few different iterations of the sunset clause, whether it applies to just this chapter, just particular actions taken by DNR, whatever you would want to do.
I think the issue would be more so to do the sunset clause on the commissioner's power to be reviewed every year in the legislature. That seems to be more of a too cumbersome from a management standpoint, according to Spud. But as far as the holding the commissioner and the department more accountable, I think the sunset provision might be needed for that section, Section 18, on a yearly or bi-yearly.
So any action taken,
The authority to shut down a fishery.
that code section, that would sunset automatically unless, what happens, unless the General Assembly approves.
Right.
I guess at this time, Representative Spencer, I'm going to entertain a motion from Chairman McCall, and I guess our process allows that amendment to be added in the Rules Committee or even on the floor. So at this point in time, depending on what his motion is, we're going to entertain his motion. Chairman McCall.
Chairman, since most of the saltwater fisheries in my district are inside glass walls, and listening to all the guys from the coast and knowing Spud like I do, and the chairman from St. Simon's, I make a motion we pass the bill. Do pass as is.
Have a motion and a second that we have a do pass on House Bill 869. And I will be remiss if I didn't tell you that we also had a letter from former Coastal Director Susan Shipman encouraging us to report this bill out favorably. We appreciate her work when she was in Spud's job, and appreciate his follow-up on that, and appreciate her words there. At this point in time, we'll all those in favor of passing out House Bill 869 with a do pass, let it be known by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, so we'll pass out House Bill 869. Mr. Chairman Lane, with a do pass recommendation. And I would tell you all, if you will, give me 1 second. I forgot to do something. Committee members, and I apologize. When I thought about this great natural resources, I think one of you said that we need to we appreciate it. Forgot to open this meeting with prayer, so we're going to close it with prayer. If y'all will, bow your heads with me, and I'll say a quick prayer. Father, we just thank you for this, for life, Lord. We thank you for this day. Father, for the resources that you have enabled us to enjoy, Father. We just give you praise and thanks. Your favor upon us and around us is immeasurable. Lord, we just thank you. We ask you to forgive us, Lord, where we fail you, and continue to bless us and guide us. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank y'all.